Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the second session of this morning. To introduce Professor Insler is really something which has been done time and time again. You have a brief resume on your program, tells you who he is. Although I must admit, excuse me, I don't like the likeness. He's far more glamorous than his photograph would suggest. Apart from the fact that he's Sanskrit professor, there is also the question of his famous translation, 1975, getting on to 30 years, of the Songs of Zarathushtra, which is the introduction, which is extremely valuable. It was valuable then, it's valuable now. And bearing in mind the discussion we had with our first speaker, I have to quote Stanley Insler, well, this is quoting from memory. I hope that Stanley Insler will forgive me if I have a minor lapse, where it says, misplaced fascination with ritual, which is the case. Stanley has really done us proud with his translation. It places the Gathas in the doctrinal context, the words of Zarathustra, Spitama himself. I cannot say more on that score, but I would remind speakers that he was invited to give the SOAS Jordan lectures for this year, and he gave a series of 5 lectures to do with a comparison and contrast between the Rigvedic themes and Avestic themes. It was a brilliant tour de force. We await its publication. I will not detain you any longer, and without further preamble, I will ask Stanley Insler to please decipher for us Zarathustra's genetic code. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Farrokh. It's always, let's say, good to have a friend introduce you. They say kinder things than anyone else would. And I must say, on repeated occasions, having been introduced by Farrokh, he gets more skilled each time he has introduced me. I'm not quite sure I live up to the brilliant, glamorous introduction that he gave, but I will try and say something new. It's difficult before an audience like yours. Since we're being very informal, allow me to take my coat off as well. The year 2003 marked an important milestone in the history of Zoroastrianism. I'm referring, of course, to UNESCO's declaration of 2003 as the 3000th anniversary of the remarkable religion and design for living founded by Zarathustra sometime around the turn of the first millennium before our current era. As many of you may know, special events were scheduled around the world to celebrate this turning point, commemorating the survival of Zoroastrianism as one of the world's oldest living faiths. These events bear testimony of the pride and esteem that living Zoroastrians possess for their extraordinary religion. There was an extremely interesting issue of Amazor published in Bombay, with contributions that touched upon almost every important aspect of the history of Zoroastrianism and its contemporary conditions around the world today. The seminar on Zoroastrianism was arranged at the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C. in December, and a similar meeting took place in Anaheim, California, later in the same month. I was honored to have participated in these events, and I was delighted to have seen that both meetings attracted large and engaged audiences who were most eager to learn and to discuss matters concerning the history and doctrines of Zoroastrianism. And here I am again today among my Zoroastrian friends in London at this event sponsored by WZO, convened once more in celebration of the UNESCO Declaration. Suffice it, I'm equally honored and pleased to be present today, especially among so many familiar faces. When asked why I am so fascinated by Zarathustra, my invariable answer is that I am a closet Zoroastrian. By that I mean to express that I believe in everything taught by Zarathustra, although I have not been born into the faith. For the simple fact is, the principles first taught by Zarathustra are of such universal nature, they are immediately appealing and compelling to anyone who has studied them carefully. And in my case, the study of them has endured throughout most of my adult lifetime. Truthfully, sometimes I wonder whether I have anything new to say about Zarathustra, having written and lectured about him so frequently. And yet each time I return to the subject from a different perspective, I realize that the extraordinary system designed by Zarathustra can be analyzed quite productively from alternate points of view. So with your indulgence, allow me to contrast two separate yet interesting ways of conceiving some of the fundamental concepts of Zarathustra's philosophical religion. Some of you may remember that I delivered a series of lectures here in London at Z House a few years ago, and that one of them was titled The System of Amusha Spentas. In that lecture, I attempted to demonstrate that through traditional order of Amusha Spentas, or holy immortals, as depicted in later Zoroastrian texts, was inherited from Zarathustra himself, and that this order was precisely arrayed by the prophet to form a coherent, closed, and productive system. So allow me to state my views and to begin by recalling the order of the Amusha Spentas at this time. 1. Vohu Manu, good thinking. 2. Asha, truth. 3. Vohu Shastra, good rule. 4. Respect. 5. Havratat, health. 6. Amratat, continuing life. To repeat their order again, only in English, we find the fixed succession of good thinking, truth, good rule or sovereignty, respect, health, and continuing life. Furthermore, I noted, and this is the important point, that each member of the series is dependently connected with the adjacent ones. That is to say, good thinking leads to the understanding of truth. Truth formulated as the laws of society is the basis of all good rule or government. Good rule or government fosters respect for it, and when there is respect for the ruling authority or government, society is healthy and vigorous, thus encouraging further good and positive thinking among the people. And thus the circle of this closed system continues in a loop, producing the further external result of peace and prosperity for everyone. I've depicted this closed system here on this first flip. We have Vohu Manu, good thinking, Asha, truth, Vohu Shastra, good rule, Aramati, I'm reading upside down, respect, Havratat, health, and Amratat, continuing life. And as you can see, they're all connected with one another, and each is dependent upon on the preceding one. Good thinking encourages an understanding of truth, which are the laws, right, of God. Rule. Good rule has no meaning without any respect, but once all of these four things are in place, then of course there is health and continuing life to either a person or to society itself. What is equally important, as I pointed out, is that the elements of this closed system can function as well in the opposite direction. Namely, health and vigor among people encourage respect for good government, better laws embodied in social truths, and these laws lead to progressive good thinking, consequently strengthening the health and vigor of society once again. The system of Amusha conditions in both directions as a productive and prosperous model for any society or social structure, and it is a tribute to Zarathustra's to have engineered this effective system from such simple elements that have universal import for all time. The wisdom of Zarathustra's system is sadly seen in its converse that seems to be the typical world situation today. By this I mean to say, wherever we look around, it appears that bad thinking has led to deceit and bad government, engendering disrespect, with the result that society has become unhealthy and its future quite uncertain. With more than a tinge of regret, I'm ashamed to say that my country is currently a clear model of the working of such a perverted version of Zarathustra's system of Amusha Spentas. There, false notions have led to ignoring both national and international laws, creating a misguided administration for which little respect exists within the country or within the community of nations. And as a consequence of the preceding issues, a large part of American society, as well as foreign communities, feel sickened and extremely negative about the future of the world. The net result of this, of course, is that instead of the correct system creating peace and prosperity, this perverse system has produced strife and economic hardship, both at home and in the rest of the world. Our contemporary situation is precisely the one Zarathustra encountered during his own lifetime. It was the large-scale spread of deceit, evil, and strife in his world, documented in the Gathas, that motivated the prophet to reflect upon the organization of society and the elements within it that were false and corrosive, and how they had become that way. He understood, just as we do today, that the basis for the unrest and discontent in his world were false ideas, theft, exploitation, bad rulers who disrespected the laws of society, and every other sort of malignant social act and political policy. By examining what was wrong in his world, Zarathustra imagined a world in which everything could be right and could be true, resulting in benefits for all members of society. But we may well ask, how could Zarathustra conceive of what was right by examining what was wrong? The answer to this question is rather simple. From Yasna 30.6, we learn that Zarathustra conceived of the presence of evil in the world as a disease that inflicted mankind. And from Yasna 31.19, we equally learn that the prophet calls himself a world healer. In fact, the whole plan for the restoration of the best existence presented in the Gathas is conceived of as a curative and healing process. Therefore, cannot we conclude, from these direct references, that Zarathustra was not only a priest, but he was also a physician. This dual role is in no way unusual in the ancient world, because healing was considered a holy art, dealing most often with life and death situations in antiquity. And it was quite normal that adept priests were also trained in the skills of medicine and healing, precisely for the reason that they came close to God, in the question of life and death. Consequently, like all physicians, Zarathustra had to have understood cause and effect, since this is the basis of all medical treatment, and his training as a physician was most helpful in allowing him to apply this knowledge to the construction of the system of Amusha Spentas. The mention of disease and healing finally brings me to the announced title of this lecture, Zarathustra's Genetic System, which is the second approach to analyzing the system of holy immortals I have in mind today. I conceived of this idea because the year 2003 also commemorated the 50th anniversary of the publication by Crick and Watson of their classical paper on the structure and replication of DNA, the building material for the survival and growth of all living things. Since we are celebrating the survival of Zoroastrianism on the one hand, and the Crick and Watson paper describes the system of survival of all living beings on the other hand, I wondered whether it would be possible to apply the insights concerning the structure and replication of DNA to the system of Amusha Spentas. As expected, this idea bore fruitful results. But before I can proceed, some comments about cell biology are necessary. But don't be alarmed, I am not about to launch into a complicated scientific discussion. Number 2. Every cell consists of 3 parts: a nucleus, surrounding matter called cytoplasm, and an encompassing membrane or cell wall. These are directly comparable to the elements of a common egg, as seen in the yolk, the egg white, and the eggshell. Furthermore, the nucleus of every cell contains all the information that is necessary for the development and future survival of the living being. You can easily comprehend this from the fact that a fertilized chicken egg will hatch a baby chick, which in due course will develop into an adult hen or rooster. All this information is contained in the chromosomes of the cell nucleus, on which are arrayed seemingly endless specific genes that determine the different inherited traits and characteristics that mark an individual and his lineage. Both the chromosomes as well as the genes are composed of DNA, which is fundamental to everything. In contrast to the cell nucleus, the cytoplasm of a cell, that is this part which is like the egg white, contains the proteins and amino acids that are necessary to store energy and food for the continuing growth and development of the living being. The production of the sustaining proteins and amino acids are ultimately controlled by the DNA in the cell nucleus. So much for cell biology. Crick and Watson determined that the structure of DNA is elegantly simple. It consists of 2 parallel strands on which there are resting only 4 separate elements that we can call 1, 2, 3, and 4, such that the element 1 can combine only with element 2, and element 3 only with element 4. Elements 1 and 3 appear on one strand of DNA, elements 2 and 4 on the second strand, and both strands twist around each other in the form of a double helix. You can picture the structure of DNA easily in the form of a twisted ladder, on which the rungs of the ladder consist of the paired elements 1 and 2, and the paired elements 3 and 4. Such is the simple structure of DNA. So here we have the 2 strands, which are parallel with one another, On strand 1 are elements 1 and 3. On strand 2, elements 2 and 4. 1 and 2 can only combine with one another. 3 and 4 can only combine with one another. And so it goes. These are layered in endless chains. And what causes the differentiation is simply how the 1, 2, 3, 4s are organized along here. But there are only 4 elements at play. DNA replicates, that is, produces itself by having the 2 strands of the helix separate. After separation, the individual strands build a new strand that is identical to the one that has separated from the original helix. That is to say, the now single strand consisting of elements 1 and 3 triggers the formation of a new complementary strand consisting of elements 2 and 4, and the original strand with elements 2 and 4 forms a new complementary strand with elements 1 and 3. Namely, the same thing is being reproduced over and over again, right? All living beings survive by continually producing DNA in this remarkably simple fashion. Let us now turn to Zarathustra's system of amushaspentas and see how the DNA model might be applied to the basic elements for his design for living. Let us first note that there is a basic distinction between the first 4 elements of good thinking, truth, good rule, and respect on the one hand, and health and continuing life on the other. In the first place, it is clear from reading the Gathas that health and continuing life for both man and God are dependent upon the existence of the prior 4 elements. Zarathustra continually stresses that neither health nor continuing life can exist either for God or for man without the proper presence of good thinking, truth, good rule, and respect. In this light, health and continuing life are the equivalent of the proteins and amino acids in the cell's cytoplasm, the chemical entities that foster and promote the proper growth, development, and survival of the organism itself. Consequently, just as the proteins and amino acids are ultimately dependent upon the DNA in the cell nucleus, so too health and continuing life are produced and dependent upon the 4 fundamental elements of the amushaspentas. There can be no health or continuing life for man or God without the existence of good thinking, truth, good rule, and respect. These are the fundamental elements necessary for the survival of both. Secondly, Zarathustra makes it explicitly clear in his poems that truth and good thinking on the one hand, good rule and respect on the other hand, stand in complementary relationships. He repeatedly informs us that the understanding of truth comes only through good thinking, and that rule or any other form of authority has no meaning without the proper respect for it. Therefore, we can map these 4 simple elements on a double helix model in which good thinking and respect appear on one strand, and truth and good rule appear on the other, with the bonding between both strands formed by the complementary pairs of these basic elements. And this I show simply by replacing 1, 3, 2, and 4 by good thinking, respect, truth, and good rule. And here you see the bonding between the truth. Good thinking, right, is bound with truth, right, and good rule is bound with respect. The 2 are essential, right, in order to have any kind of meaningful or productive manner. Furthermore, we can now understand how the system of elements reproduces itself in a manner similar to DNA. The 2 strands separate, and the one with good thinking and respect will form a new complementary strand with truth and good rule, and the strand with truth and good rule will form a new one with good thinking and respect. This occurs because the elements on each of the strands cannot survive without the element on the other. And in this regard, the DNA model of the holy entities is similar to the systems model I first discussed. The two models function in both directions, and the elements of each model are dependent upon those on the other. Again, it is the simplicity of the organization of the DNA model that allows it to work so successfully, not only in nature, but also in society or religion. Finally, there's a very important point I need to underscore. When I began the discussion about DNA, I mentioned that Zarathustra considered evil and deceit to be a disease that afflicted the world of mankind. Once the prophet has made this point in Yasna 30.6, in the very next verse, he states that Ahura Mazda came into the world with his rule of truth and good thinking, and that enduring respect gave body and breath to it. That is to say, the respect of man gave life to the good rule of God. By this statement, Zarathustra has pointed out two fundamental notions. First, that the remedy or medicine for curing the disease of evil and deceit in the world is a sovereign rule that is based on truth and good thinking. And secondly, that such a sovereign rule cannot exist without respect for its authority. All four elements are necessary for ridding the world of evil and deceit, and all four elements are equally necessary for the survival of both God and mankind. Cast in the simplest terms, truth, good thinking, enlightened government, and respect are the basic genetic elements for the survival of the world, the only ones that can produce peace and prosperity, growth and stability, and all the healthy conditions that will promote the progressive advance of mankind. I am not suggesting by this lecture that Zarathustra was the first biological geneticist. Rather, I do believe that the prophet was a physician and that he understood the relationship between disease and remedy. However, his great insight allowed him to view evil and deceit in the world as a disease, and his great intelligence allowed him to propose a model for eliminating this disease and returning the world to a healthy condition by which it could survive and live into the future. That the model he proposed for world survival consists of four basic interrelated elements that find a direct parallel in the four interrelated elements found in DNA of living beings, demonstrates that the most complex conditions and problems can most often be solved in the simplest and most elegant fashion. It is a pity that this approach is almost invariably ignored in our times and buried under the clutter and corrosiveness of overcomplicated and vapid proposals that lead nowhere except to further difficulties that increase maladies all over. On the other hand, the prophet Zarathustra's simple genetic code for survival has blissfully allowed a great religion to endure for 3,000 years and to impart to its followers a simple and effective model for sustaining their own lives and those around them. Thank you. I hope it wasn't too complicated to follow.
Ladies and gentlemen, what can one say? I have also a new model of the double helix. It takes this shape. Crick and Watson. Crick and Watson, had they known about Zarathustra, they would have deciphered the DNA code much sooner. Alas, they weren't there. The second set of elements are Professor Stanley Insler, and the UK. I propose we start a new movement. Stop Stanley Insler. Stop him from leaving the UK. He must speak to us more. Now, without further ado, we do have time for questions, comments, answers. Please, the floor is open. And would you prefer just something?
No, I like standing, but I don't need the microphone.
Let's take the model, good thinking.
The first one.
Yes. Now, if you see George Bush today, President Bush, how would you start training him to good thinking? Or is it lost cause?
Well, you would need a major implant, right? They also would need better advisors, right? And the best thing is to put him on the next Mars mission. So I can't do it. I wish I could, right? And not only George Bush, I don't understand why Tony Blair, who is a very intelligent man, licks George Bush's behind, right? Because no one can be that stupid, right? So there has to be a hidden agenda here, unfortunately. And we know anything hidden is deceptive.
Well, how do you start with good thinking?
No, you need an implant. Right? First he needs a lobotomy. Well, probably he needs a new brain, right? And unfortunately, it's too late for that.
I'm just curious to know, how did this all go wrong then? How did it start becoming a disaster as it is now? Why did this theory, not sort of, follow the right path all the way? And, we are where we are at the moment, with the example of George Bush and Tony Blair.
Well, this thing has been going on forever. Okay? It obviously went on in Zarathustra's time, before Zarathustra's time, right? Because if you believe in dualism, and I do believe in dualism, okay, if there's night, there's day, if there's up, there's down, if there's good, there's evil, all right? I'm not saying we're genetically predisposed that way. Maybe we are, right? That is to say, but I think greed, avarice, lies, and deception are as old as mankind. And so what we have been fortunate enough, right? Just a few times in the history of the world, great thinkers like Zarathustra, or Moses, or Buddha, right, arose among the people and showed them where things were wrong, where things were deceptive, right, where they were going down the right path, and suggested what the right path could be. However, the point is, there were fewer people who had such understanding rather than the majority who were, how shall I say, seduced, right, by what looked like, a more comfortable way to read the life. Truth is never comfortable, right? I mean, anybody who has faced, any kind of difficulty in lifetime, right, or been presented, right, with situations that are highly complex, knows that to find the truth about it, to act with truth in these situations is 10 times more difficult than to cave in and say, okay, I'll go with it now, and maybe when I have time, I'll do it. People simply don't have courage, right? But you have to have knowledge first to have courage, right? And I think this world lacks a lot of courage today. And why it does so, I don't know. I mean, there's a globalization of greed, okay? There's the notion that instead of waiting, right, for things to ripen, mature, as nature wanted it to be, we want instant results tomorrow, right, if not this afternoon. Think of email. I remember the blissful days of old post, when I would write a letter, to someone in Germany. It took a week for them to get it, a week to write a reply, and a week for me to get it. 3 weeks passed by, and we were happy. We were wonderful, right? It gave us time to do other things. Now I get an email. If I don't answer it in 20 minutes, I get, 40 repeats saying, why haven't you answered my email? And I write back because I'm bloody not interested in doing so immediately. So where did it go wrong? I don't know. Why has there always been war? Why has there always been... But the point is, despite this, it is disease, okay? The minute disease takes place, remember the cure has set in at the same time, right? And fortunately enough, there have been enough people, right, throughout history who have been immune, let's talk in medical terms, immune so that their own system, their own mind, their own courage, their own view of the world has been strong enough to fight off any of the kind of disease of deception and greed and anything else that they've been attacked with. And I think it's going that way forever.
There is hope then.
Yes, I am very hopeful. Right? I wouldn't be a Zoroastrian otherwise.
Would you say that the period of the Achaemenid king, Cyrus the Great, who is the founder of, or we claim that he laid the foundation to the first human rights declaration, and Darius, who is known to have ruled his empire with a reasonable degree of responsibility, social responsibility, and who left inscriptions saying, with the help of Ahura Mazda, I found the strength to run my country according to
Not
the
only
right
Ahura
course.
Mazda, through truth.
Yeah, for the truth. So would you say that those are the models that perhaps embodied and practiced something of the teachings that they found in the Gathas?
Yes.
And are there others like them that you could perhaps remind us of?
Well, I mean, if you look at the history of any modern country in a way, okay, there were periods, right? The natural expansionism is always a problem, right? Because they're always impinging into your own political borders from other sides, so you have to fight back. Nonetheless, there have been periods in modern history where governments have had enlightened constitutions, okay, with laws, you know, offering equal opportunity to everyone, in which people have been happy and content, right? How fast these faded and were replaced by others, you know, we all well know. But there is always the possibility, right? Except, you know, I don't want to make a disillusioning comment, but things getting worse. But there has to be more truth, all right? And to get the truth out is what's important. I mean, we've heard about this is what the problem in Tajikistan is. Right? How do you get the truth out? How do you get people to understand what's really going on? Right? It's so much easier to say that we have a clandestine group is fine, okay? Under particular circumstances, it had to be. I mean, I have friends, you know, lived in the Soviet Union, you know, long periods, and everything had to be done clandestinely. But you can't forget the truth. Right? It's too easy to forget the truth, and that's what's bad.
Do we think we should start with Iran, the homeland, where the names of the months carry the name Bahman, which means Bohu Mana, and Armaiti, we have Shahrivar, which means to correct rule. And we have all these concepts built into the Persian structure. Every month has its name and it all ties back there. And one would hope that there could be this kind of awakening to what things really mean there, since they actually have an institution.
You know, after 9/11, the Iranians were very, very sympathetic to America. I mean, they went out and protested with everything. And then that schmuck George W. Bush came up with the axis of evil, right? In which he named Iran, Iraq, and North Korea, right? And that simply, you know, the people say, what are we doing? Why are we showing any kind of sympathy for America, right? When, you know, they act this way towards us. Right? I mean...
Correction, you said Iran, not Iran.
Yeah. But you want to know something interesting? There was a document that was published by a horribly conservative institute, right? 2 years before, in 1999. Right? This document was called Rebuilding America's Defenses. All right? And the document, which goes through 98 pages of garbage, right, basically had one important point. The only way that we can, you know, protect America in the future is to have a base of operation in the Middle East and a base of operation in East Asia. And going into Iraq, right, and all of the brouhaha over North Korea, right, belongs to this major plan. It had nothing to do with terrorism, it had nothing to do with Saddam Hussein, you know, and if you ask how many Americans know about this, it would be 0.00002%. I mean, I send this document to everybody that I know. I mean, the whole thing is a subterfuge. It is a whole tissue of deceits and lies, and it's horrible. I'm looking for somewhere to move. Should I go to the UK?
Iran.
I can't do that. I'm Jewish, right? Right. How about New Zealand. Let's start a new Zoroastrian world in New Zealand.
No, I just want to ask, excuse my throat, that it's such a good religion. The more I read, the more I hear. And I fail to understand how handful people have hijacked or monopolized this religion, and they are stopping other people to learn from it or to improve their lives on it. And I think it's time they should give chance to other people to come in and follow
Look,
back.
I mean, I mentioned this before to someone else. In Judaism, we have 4 or 5 different kinds of Judaism. You know, we have the progressive, the reform, the conservative, the semi-conservative, the orthodox, the demi-orthodox, everything, okay? Never get to be able to agree about it, right? They all think different things, and each one feels, why are these other people creating such a hindrance, you know, for the rest, you know, to understand? It's what human nature is like. I mean, there is one road, okay, but many ways to go, right, on that one road.
But they obstruct. They don't let the other people get on the road.
We're challenging the first 2 elements, good thinking, truth. I mean, the good example you just gave regarding Judaism, we got different versions. I say, from where you stand in life, good thinking may be different from me when I'm sitting here. My view to good thinking leading to truth may be different from where you're standing over there. So there's no such thing as good thinking and truth, which is fundamental elements of your DNA.
You see, I've lectured about truth on many times. I think, and here's the point. When you read the Gospels, it's very frustrating. Okay, Zarathustra keeps saying, we should do this with truth, we should do that with truth, we should do blah, 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 blah. Okay? You want to know, what is this truth? All right? Now, it's quite clear, right? And if you had listened to my London lectures and my Z House lectures a few years ago, the truth, right? He always gives the answer to these puzzling questions in the Gospels themselves. Truth, in Zarathustra's terms, are the laws that Ahura Mazda revealed to him. Okay? The way to behave properly in society. So in a certain sense, truth in that sense is like the 10 Commandments of the Jews. Right? Now, no matter what kind of sect you follow in Judaism, you all believe in the 10 Commandments in a certain sense, right? And in Zoroastrianism, right? No matter what kind of sect they may have been, right? The point was, right? You had to understand through your thinking that the laws, okay, that Ahura Mazda proclaimed to Zarathustra were the ones, right, to build a progressive, safe, and honest society. So that's what I'm saying about the truth. Truth is, there are no alternate versions of truth. Okay? I mean, this was a fiction that people used to say. I mean, I had a colleague at Yale who founded a whole international movement that was extremely irritated, in which he said, there are no truths, there are only shifting fictions. Okay? The minute you accept such a notion, all right, then there's nothing to strive for. There's no goal. All right? If there are shifting fictions continuously and the ground is moving under you, right? Or today you're in, you know, East Pakistan and tomorrow you're in Singapore, there is no orientation. Okay? Truth has to be absolute, right? And if you read the Gathas really carefully, right, man does not reach truth. Truth only resides with Ahura Mazda. And Ahura Mazda is the only one who has created it, and he has proclaimed it through Zarathustra. So it is absolute. Right? So when we talk about good thinking is necessary, right, to understand the truth, what Zarathustra really means is you have to understand, okay, through your right way of thinking, that the principle, okay, that Ahura Mazda created for survival of society, right, mankind, right, are the only way to go.
But I think the truth, as every time in history, changes as it goes. The truth, 3,000 years ago.
No, the shadow of truth changed, not truth itself.
So what's the difference of shadow of truth?
What people think is the truth, and not really the truth.
It's a matter of conscience, right, wrong?
No. I mean, you should, once you've learned things, you should know what's right or wrong. But are we inherent? Do we have an inherent kind of biological genetic nature that determines, lets us know immediately what's right or wrong. No, you have to be taught that. Right? And that's the whole purpose of, socialization, religious training. Certain things we know, I think, are genetic, right? Because they are biological, like killing somebody, okay? We're naturally inclined not to kill somebody. But other things like, good rule, something like that, I don't think that's not genetic.
Can Hilda, please?
I don't think I can be thinking very well.
Yeah.
But I can't understand if this has been going for so many centuries, and this is a very basic way of living your life. Why is it the people who actually invaded us from Persia, and you know who I'm talking about, why are they so aggressive in their thinking? Why are they wanting to do nothing but malign other people? How has it changed so much in Iran and that area of the Middle East?
They've been taught wrong.
But why is it people that are being taught, who should be having good judgment and who should be having intelligence here, working there, why are they thinking so badly?
I don't know. If you could find it, bottle it, and sell it, you actually would become a great engineer.
Maybe we should all do what Indrajit is saying and become Zoroastrians all through the world.
Right. Or at least make people understand what it's all about. I mean, as I said in the beginning, I consider myself a Zoroastrian. I know I'm not a Zoroastrian, but the point is I believe in what Zarathustra said. Right? And to do so is fine, as far as I'm concerned.
Maybe our philologists should study evil rather than the truth. Because I'm serious believer that you have to know your enemy very well.
But this is the whole point I mentioned about, I couldn't go into detail. When you look at the Gotham, the documentation of evil in the world is what Zarathustra basically talks about, okay? He doesn't say how to know what's good, but he points out what is evil. And naturally, since there is this documentation in all of his thinking, that's how you understand what's good, by identifying what's the evil. So I don't think I think evil has been studied quite long and quite deeply in the history of the world. In fact, too much so.
Well, my question consists of two parts. The first part is that the priests in any religion, they try to find a way for the survival of their religion. First of all, I want to know what priests in Zoroastrian religion they have done for this matter. And secondly, the concept of heaven and hell, as I've heard, originated from Zoroastrian, and then it went into Christianity.
Okay, first about the priests, all right? All right. Zoroastrianism is no different than all other religions insofar as the grammar of religion. This is what ritual is the grammar of religion, right? That's learned by everybody, right? It's like a common language, essentially, right? And this is what allows as a language to pass on from generation to generation. Very simply, ritual functions, has a precise function right within society. But the grammar, as we know, or let's say, knowing how to form the right words of the language doesn't write the text in a certain sense, right? We have, some ability to take all of this grammar that we have in our head and make some sense out of it. Potentially every great book is in your head, right? I mean, you cannot have every possible sentence that anyone could have ever spoken or will ever speak without a grammatical system, and this is what ritual is. Beyond ritual, okay, ritual has to be contextualized, all right? It has to be put, right, in some kind of scene that gives it even a greater significance and meaning. And that scene, is understanding what it's all about and why there is ritual, okay? Many people go through life just performing ritual without any sense what is the purpose of ritual, right? And what does the ritual stand for? And even more, what do the texts mean, okay, that are sort of, for the most part, automatically repeated continuously in ritual. So this answers the fact that, priests are important for ritual and so and so. why, what was the second question about? Well, heaven and hell. I mean, no, heaven and hell existed among other religions too.
I thought that it was originated in Zoroastrianism and then it went to Judaism and Sikhism.
I mean, every religion likes to think it's the oldest and has been basic, you know, the body from which other things have been borrowed. I'm just not quite sure.
So how does this religion encourage people to practice teachings?
Oh, here's the answer. And that's a clear answer about Zoroastrianism. The Zoroastrian philosophy I know is you don't know what's going to happen next, all right? That is, but you do know what's going to happen here in your own lifetime. And consequently, because that's the only thing we're sure about, we must make our life as best as possible, right? And how can we make our life as best as possible? Well, by, you know, the good thoughts, good works, and good deeds, right? And to understand how all of it works together. That's what and it's the same thing for Judaism, right? I mean, Judaism doesn't believe in heaven or hell. Right? It's just a kind of modern notion that's been grafted onto it. And Judaism, right, offers the same lack of choice in a certain sense, or the same understanding to its practitioners. You don't know what's going to happen next. So this life, it is in this life you have to make a great commitment to do your best, right? As if it was the only chance that you have. When I teach about Indian religion, right, people who believe in this say to me, do I believe in reincarnation? I say, no. They say, well, how could you be so interested in Sanskrit and things Indian if you weren't at one time born in India? And I said, well, that's another matter. And I said, even if there were reincarnation, I would reject it simply because I like to think I have only one shot of being alive, and I want that one shot to be the best that I can make it. And I think everybody should go through life precisely that way. Not worry about what your future reward would be, but to worry about what your current reward is, or the reward that you give to other people by acting in the proper manner.
One last long question or two short questions? A long question.
Zal always has a good question. I'll ask you in private.
Suppose, now to be advocate of a devil, suppose Zarathustra was wrong. Then what would you think about this way? If Zarathustra was right, then everything, and everybody believed him, and everybody said, all right, we are all Zoroastrians, we are going to do truth, everything is truth, and so there will be no wars, there will be no disease, nothing. Right? So the world would have been static, absolutely static. We wouldn't have no emails, we wouldn't have no this thing. So in fact, I think, on the other hand, George Bush and Tony Blair could be right. Because then progress have been made. You have to wear nice shirts and nice ties and nice trousers. Otherwise, you wouldn't have anything. You would be living in with the skin clothes. If Zarathustra was right.
Well, here's the trick. Okay, maybe Zarathustra was right. The point is, he and his people would have behaved one way, but you can be sure their neighbors didn't behave that way, right? And it is a dynamic, right? Always an impingement, right? That forces us, no matter how committed, right? How noble, right, how optimistic, how perfect we may be to act perfectly. There have to be some response. But I would rather think that he was right. Right, and I think more than having proposed a model, let's say, for a country, right? And to some degree there was success, as we know from the success of the Achaemenid Empire. I think the model more is in the individual, in the family, and in the community, the smaller community. Whether a nation can ever follow such a model, right, is a very difficult one. I mean, despite all the fact that, that Darius thanks us continuously, thanks Ahura Mazda and Truth for letting him done that, what has he done? He's gone out and conquered people, right? He's taken prisoners, all of whom have to pay tribute to him, right? So, I mean, the point is, can you be a good guy and a bad guy at the same time? I mean, it's usually good cop against bad cop, you know, playing off the things in one manner or another. I often say I wear several hats, I think, at my institution, but I never wear them simultaneously. The trouble is when you're a politician, you have to, right? And that's the bad thing, right? When you're a prophet, of course, you can't. But hats off to Zarathustra.
I would ask Professor Insler to stay put while I view him at a slight distance, and somebody else is just going to take over temporarily. Would you mind?
No.
Thank you.
You're not going to represent.
I think in fact I would. So I deserve it.
Ladies and gentlemen,
We are honest.
today our world body, the World Zoroastrian Organization, is taking the unique step of honoring a person who was born in and pursues a faith other than Zoroastrianism. That person is the world-renowned Gothic scholar, Professor Stanley Insler, who has once again regaled us in today's seminar with his insightful and magnificent presentation. Educated at Columbia, Yale, Tübingen, and Madras universities, Professor Insler has taught at the prestigious Yale University since 1963. He is currently its Salisbury Professor of Sanskrit and Comparative Philology, as well as the Chairman of its Iranian Language Studies Department. A Fellow of the Royal Asiatic Society of Great Britain and American, French, and German Oriental societies, among many others. He has published, including in Hamazo, and lectured widely on subjects dealing with ancient languages and texts of India and Iran, including Zarathustra's Gathas. He has devoted a better part of his life to the study of our Zoroastrian faith, its history, and its practices. But that is not why the World Zoroastrian Organization proposes to honor him so uniquely today. Like him, many non-Zoroastrian scholars have similarly devoted their lives to the study of ours. What distinguishes Professor Insler from them is that his scholarship is not based on philology alone. His knowledge of all aspects of Zoroastrianism, its practices and history is so profound, his belief in them so deep, and his conviction in their truth so genuine that they premate his translation of Zarathustra's Gathas and seem to reveal the real meanings underlining our prophet's teachings and ethical philosophies. So much so that his translation is considered to be one of the most current and definitive works in that area. The same profoundness and understanding has also come true in his articles wherever published. So do they in his lectures on Zoroastrianism, whether at WZO forums or before lay Zoroastrian and non-Zoroastrian audiences around the world, or at several scholarship gatherings. Always using simple, understandable English, like today, his writings and talks can be easily comprehended by all such audiences and forums alike. By doing so, Professor Insler has given a new dimension to Zarathustra's Gathas and brought its beauty and meanings within the grasp of all who choose to know them. His devotion to Zarathustra's message has been demonstrated by his willingness to travel tirelessly anywhere in the world to speak and explain those messages with simplicity and clarity to all such audiences. His service to WZO and the community in making our Prophet and his teachings known so far and wide is perhaps unmatched by any living Zoroastrian or non-Zoroastrian scholar. Professor Insler is devoted to the Judaistic faith in which he was born. Yet, he has also chosen to live by the principles of Wohomenu and Asha, which constitutes the bedrock of our faith. He is thus a living example of a non-Zoroastrian who not only applies his scholarship of ancient languages to the basic scriptures of Zarathustra, but also chooses to put its principles into practice in all aspects of his daily living, like all Zoroastrians do. What Professor Insler has done for the cause of Zoroastrianism, both for and beyond WZO, stems from his deep respect for and conviction in the rationality and truth of Zarathustra's teachings. No non-Zoroastrian, therefore, deserves to be recognized and honored by WZO and perhaps the community. On behalf of the WZO, and this has been passed unanimously by the international board all over the world, Stanley, I'm privileged to bestow the honor never bestowed by it to a non-Zoroastrian of naming and co-opting him as the Fellow of the World Zoroastrian Organization.
Yeah.
Come here, they won't be able to hear me. On behalf of the World Zoroastrian Organization, I'd like to present Stanley with this scroll, which obviously you can frame in your house.
It's a film.
Yes, and I'll read this to you, and then you can come and view it afterwards. The International Board of the World Zoroastrian Organization is pleased to bestow on Professor Stanley Insler the singular honor of Fellow of the World Zoroastrian Organization. Professor Insler has devoted his life to the study of Zoroastrian religion. His knowledge of all aspects of our faith, its beliefs, practices, and history is so profound and deep that his translations of Zarathustra's Gathas bring out the real meaning underlying our Prophet's teachings and ethical philosophies. So do many of his teaching articles and lectures on Zoroastrianism. As a result, his translation of the Gathas, written in simple and understandable English, can be easily comprehended by lay people rather than scholars alone. Professor Insler, whilst devoted to the faith into which he was born, has chosen to live by the principles of Wohomenu and Asha, thereby showing his deep respect and conviction in the truth of Zarathustra's teaching. Professor Insler has willingly graced the numerous seminars held by WZO over 24 years. Thank you, sir.
I'm speechless, which you know is an unnatural condition for me. But I want to say I'm deeply honored and thrilled, Gerard, that I have become a fellow of the World Zoroastrian Organization. It's always a pleasure to be here in London. I have so many friends among its membership, and I always find you as an audience the most receptive, engaged, and wonderful people. And for the board and everyone else, let me just say, I'm I'm so happy.
When is your revised edition of Songs of Zarathushtra coming
Yes,
out?
I'm working on a revised edition, right? Not so philologically complex, but with more explanatory material and introduction. I hope to finish it, as I say every year, at the end of the summer. But it will come, right? It will come. So I hope by the end of this summer, right? I have always put quality over quantity. So.